Welcome to Harlem Capital's More Equity podcast. We're so glad you're here. Each season, we'll be exploring a new aspect of the startup and VC landscape by speaking to founders, investors, and top industry leaders.
Welcome to the final episode of our Diverse Emerging Manager series. I'm delighted to introduce our final guest, Megan Ruan, General Partner at Goldhouse Ventures. Goldhouse Ventures is the leading fund investing in passionate Asian and Pacific Islander entrepreneurs. Let's jump into our conversation. Well, hi, Megan. Welcome to the Harlem Capital More Equity podcast. I'm super excited to have you on as part of our Diverse Emerging Manager series. It's been great to get connected and excited to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me, Gabby. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. And of course, I've gotten to know you a little bit, but would love to introduce you to our audience. So could you share a little bit more background on who you are, where you grew up, where you've worked before Goldhouse Ventures?
Absolutely. So I'm originally from the Twin Cities, Minnesota, born and raised. My parents are immigrants from mainland China, but both my sister and I spent 18 years growing up in the U.S. And before I joined Goldhouse, I was living on the East Coast in New York City for almost 5 years. And I think in that time, a combination of investment management, working at a family office. I led venture investments for the Johnson & Johnson family for several years. So I really got a deeper look into the world of East Coast finance, as well as working with a ton of investment managers and fund managers across different asset classes, but particularly in the venture ecosystem. And so what it led to with Goldhouse was realizing the diversity that existed in the worlds that I had been working in could be improved. And that was a big reason why I'm so passionate about the work that we do here.
Fantastic. Well, maybe that's a good place to start. And for our audience, would love to maybe kick off with just a little bit more background on what is Goldhouse. I know I've seen it in the media. Our team at Harlem Capital is intimately familiar. But what is the organization? What is the core mission? And what have you guys been building in the last few years?
Yeah. So we're a collective, and we were created to advance representation and economic success for the Asian Pacific Islander community. So when I say API, I don't mean the tech term. I mean Asian and Pacific Islander as a diverse community. But in terms of what we do, so we were built to become the resource amplification and investment go-to for any creative or company builder of API background. So we kind of split our work into two sides, the creative side and then the company side. So when I talk about our creative work, I really mean Goldhouse's work in the entertainment, media, and cultural industries. And so there, our strong belief is that changing how we're seen as a community starts with reshaping our perception in public arenas, including big screens. So a lot of Goldhouse's early work and now our creative and media engine comes from advising major Hollywood production studios, streaming platforms like Disney, like Netflix, on their content that involves diverse audiences and diverse cast members, producers, writers, etc. So we've been behind the success of films like Crazy Rich Asians, Parasite, Shang-Chi, the first Asian Marvel superhero, and many, many more. And it's really exciting to see the changes in society that we can even reflect upon in the last few years in terms of how this more accurate, authentic representation of our faces in the media has changed how society has perceived us as a population. So that was kind of like early days origin of Goldhouse. As we moved on, we realized that the same opportunity existed in tech and business, in changing how our community is represented in C-suites and boardrooms. And that's actually a big part of the reason why I joined Goldhouse, was coming from more of a traditional finance and business background, realizing that the same kind of storytelling and the effect of changing what an actor looks like, or changing what the main character of a TV show looks like on a child's experience growing up in this country as a minority is equally as important when we look at upper executive management levels in businesses, and what that means for how people perceive their career trajectories, what they can reach for, what their options are. And so the work that we do on the company side is really meant to change that, is meant to change the fact that Asians and Pacific Islanders are the least well represented in management roles of any demographic. And so tactically, what that looks like is we choose to focus on early stage company founders and try to accelerate those high potential builders to the highest echelons, and make sure that when they get to the Fortune 500, that we don't have to reverse engineer their C-suites and boardrooms because they will have already prioritized diversity. So we do that through an accelerator, the largest Asian-focused founder accelerator in the country, a founder network, which is the largest invite-only network of API entrepreneurs, as well as now our fund, Gold House Ventures.
Wow, that's awesome. And there's so much to dig into. I do want to start with your point on like visibility and storytelling. That's something at our fund that we really believe in, that like you can't be what you can't see. And it's hard to change the narrative when no one knows what the right narrative should be, or when a false narrative is sort of being pushed. And so I think that's one reason why I really love the work you've done on the media side. And it's exciting to see that translate to the company side and the business world with the company pieces, the accelerator pieces at Gold House Ventures, and the fund itself. So definitely love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess so understand the background for sort of the impetus for wanting to expand into the company side for media. You've got the accelerator now. I guess what does it then look like to take this idea for the fund to ultimately launching it? Like, how did you start to craft the fund strategy for Gold House Ventures? I guess what is the fund strategy today? Would love if you could walk us through the step-by-step part of the journey of coming up with that.
Absolutely. And the fund is really a long time in the making. I think when we think about any way to accelerate businesses, it's really people and capital, right? And on the people side, we have always played this role of making sure that we're identifying talent, stacking resources against that talent, making sure that founders have the advisors, the mentors, the fellow founder community that they need. And we've done that since 2019 through our accelerator program, and then all of the additional program we do through our founder network. I think the impetus to start the fund was really realizing that Gold House itself is also a membership collective, and a lot of those members who are CEOs, successful founders, celebrities, have already played an enormous role in influencing the trajectories of the companies we've worked with through our accelerator. There's just been no formal legal tie between those two sides. And so I think starting a fund meant that we could, A, formalize that into a legal structure, and then B, align incentives in such a way that people who are actually not always the traditional audience for benefiting from the huge financial upside of successful startups could also be a part of that journey as well. So we first started to think seriously about what a fund could look like about a year and a half ago. And we thought, we're certainly in the business of building net new opportunities. We're not really, Gold House as an organization has never sought to replicate, efforts that are already being done extremely well elsewhere. And so we looked around at the venture landscape and said, there are funds that are focused on minority communities, but there are no funds that are specifically focused on the Asian and Pacific Islander community. So since we felt there was a white space, we felt like it was appropriate for us to then build there. For the strategy of the fund is a little bit unique. I don't think a lot of index funds exist in the venture community, and that's for good reason. Venture is extremely fragmented. There are startups in every corner of the country, of the world, and it would be impossible to say, I want to be in every single great Asian-founded startup that exists, unless you sit in a position where you are the connector between the players in the industry. And so for us, having already built this massive founder network of Asian founders, and also having cultivated a venture network of Asian angel investors and institutional investors at early stage funds who are of Asian background or who do focus on investing in Asian founders, and then add to that the third leg of us being a nonprofit, it put us in this very unique position of being able to turn venture into a team sport. And Gabby, I know that is probably something very familiar to you at Harlem because of all the funds in this landscape. That's the most possible when you are not only an investor but also a community builder, which I think Harlem does an amazing job of as well. And so we basically said to all of our investors across the venture landscape, hey, how great would it be if every time you invested in an awesome Asian founder, you hit up Goldhouse Ventures and we participated on that founder's cap table, brought them into our founder network, supported them in ways that supplement and complement the ways that you, as a lead venture investor, support them. And we build a fund that way. So that was sort of the high level concept of how this fund would work. In practice, we knew we also wanted to give those founders unique resources. So our LP base is very intentionally focused on successful Asian founders, family offices, both in the US as well as in Asia, for companies that want to have a cross-border footprint. And then we're also very focused on net new opportunities like our board diversity efforts, talent search, and other ways to connect Asian founders with each other.
That's amazing. I'm obsessed with this phrase, you turn venture into a team sport. And we definitely believe that too, that it does take galvanizing a community, one, to support founders in the journey, but it makes it that much better when you can bring people along who historically have been outside of the venture ecosystem and been able to benefit. And I think the keys I picked up in terms of how you figured out the strategy were, one, finding the white space, building on an existing community and collective. And I think what's remarkable was you get to be that connective tissue between folks in media, folks in business, founders, operators, LPs, and really be the galvanizing force. So that's really exciting. I guess, so that was a year and a half ago. You guys have come a really long way. I'm curious, how much has changed so far in terms of that strategy as you've continued to scale the fund and fundraise? And maybe what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned that you might not have expected at the beginning of the journey?
Yeah, such a great question, and so much has changed. 18 months is such a long time in this theme of
it's like a lifetime, it feels like sometimes.
It really does. So I think initially we were very data driven, and we still are. But I think initially we focused on the fact that even if we couldn't initially get this a full spectrum of the venture community to participate in this fund, we knew that we had the numbers in our favor. 41% of the Midas list is of Asian or Pacific Islander descent. Over a quarter of unicorns founded in the last 2 decades had at least one Asian or Pacific Islander founder. So we knew that making this Asian founder index as our strategy was going to be successful, even if we could get part of the way there. I think what's changed in that time has actually been realizing that this venture as a team sport strategy is very possible. And I think that was sort of what we were testing as a proof of concept to see whether in this very competitive, sometimes sharp elbows industry where allocation is limited, especially in the hardest to access deals, whether venture investors were going to be willing to share their most high potential opportunities with us. And we really found that to be true. And I attribute that to the additional unique value add that Goldhouse brings, whether it's, putting a fledgling consumer brand in a Marvel movie or helping partner a company with a tech company with a celebrity spokesperson that can speak to their brand. I think those are things that are easy for Goldhouse to do, given the seat that we sit in. But it's also allowed us to access deals that we didn't even think we'd be able to get into. And so in terms of how it's changed, I think we are now focused on building our own kind of sourcing and founder community so that we don't entirely rely on other venture investors and their buy-in to our mission, which, although strong, we definitely want to stand independently as a go-to resource for Asian founders. I think lessons learned in that process is something that every venture investor learns along the way, which is that relationships are key above all, and that this is truly, it's a people-driven business, and your relationships with your LPs, with your fellow investors, with your founders are what you need to prioritize and spend the most time on. And I think secondarily to that has been seeing how powerful a mission can be in fundraising, in winning allocation with founders, in convincing other venture investors to work with you, and especially on the fundraising side, can be just as powerful as having a really strong team or an amazing track record.
Totally. 100% agree that relationships are key and drive everything. I think coming into venture, I would have thought it was about like the numbers, about the deals, about just the investments and like, the financial outcomes. But at the end of the day, it's about people. People make decisions. People are building companies. People are putting their heart and soul into their work. And that is the core of everything. And I actually got a chance to chat with another investor that you've worked with who shared that you were a super connector. And so I think in venture, that is incredibly valuable. So I wanted to dig in a little bit about how your network has really come to play in your work at Gold House Ventures. Is there a time that, you were able to tap into someone and they came through very meaningfully for the fund, for founders? I think hearing stories like that is always super helpful. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about like how you approach it, how you do it, and how it's come to light.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me think a little bit more on like a specific instance. But first of all, I'm like really curious who that was. I'm flattered that they would describe me as a super connector. I
Can't reveal my sources.
Good journalism. I think, in terms of how Gold House is developed as an organization and also how it's impacted me personally, I think network has been the biggest component of that. One of the things that is really, really special about Gold House, both on the nonprofit side as well as now on the fund side, is that it's almost as if we can network our way to anything. And the answer is never no. It's just always, if not now, then when. And that kind of lack of a ceiling on who we can network our way to, whether it's, a tech giant like Eric Schmidt, who's not even in the API community, but cares deeply, someone like John Doerr, who, is, again, an ally, but has a huge ability and impact and sway in the venture community. I think our ability to network outside of our specific, like, defined Asian and Pacific Islander universe has also been really tremendous. I think our board diversity efforts are an example of that, where we're partnering with funds that are focused on tons of other multicultural communities, Black, Latin, women, LGBTQ, like all of these audiences are extremely important to us and our mission as well. I actually think, though, that the most interesting and rewarding instances are when founders help each other. And so I think one of the reasons why I love the work we do is that we don't always invest in every Asian founder that comes to us. Sometimes it's not a fit for our fund, but we still will invite them to join our founder network and make sure that they have access to the resources, including other founders. And some of the best partnerships, I think, have come out of that. It's when, we get the founder of a Vietnamese coffee supply company, Win Coffee, partnering with a musician that we've helped catapult. And this person, we help launch their music career, and then they meet through our founder network, and they're able to do a really cool collab that kind of catapults both of their businesses, both of their brands. I think those are really exciting moments. And maybe we can come back to other examples as I think of them through this conversation.
Oh, no, that's great. That's great. I was smiling at that point because, like, we really believe, like, if we are going to be the only folks helping our founders, like, we end up being a bottleneck. They can't get the support that they need. And so if we can enable founders to support each other, to uplift each other, to help them out with things that, we might not even be the best at, that, like, just helps to exponentially scale everyone's efforts that much more. So it's cool that you guys have a similar ethos on your end. I do want to switch gears a little bit to talking about like fundraising a little bit more tactically, because I feel like that can be one of the biggest black boxes for anyone who's launching a fund. And I think where Gold House Ventures had a lot of sort of like a huge leg up was in the community, where you mentioned that a lot of the initial first LPs came from people who are already involved with Gold House and a lot of the work that you've been doing. And so I'm curious, like, as you went outward sort of beyond that initial group of people, what was fundraising really like? What was the reception of potential LPs to the strategy, to all of the value add you bring to founders?
Well, we were fortunate to
close our fund in February. And so I think from a timing perspective, a lot of the market dynamics that are currently at play are fortunately not impacting us too much. But I think in terms of the fundraising journey, I completely agree. I think this is the part that is the hardest for any emerging fund manager, especially someone who's raising their first fund, to think about, and probably the scariest part of this entire process. Because we go into it because we love meeting with founders and because we have friendship networks and professional networks within venture. But when you're faced with this prospect of now raising the capital for you to deploy yourself, I think that can be very intimidating. Personally, I had the benefit of sitting on the LP side, on the other side of the table, prior to joining Goldhouse and raising our first fund. So in one of my former seats, sitting as part of the family office of the Johnson & Johnson family, I had the opportunity to meet and diligence dozens of early stage funds as a limited partner. And so I think that taught me a lot about what LPs look for in terms of fundraising materials, decks, the legal agreements, side letters, like all of the nitty gritty of what LPs expect, what they expect to see when they open your data room. And fortunately, I think those are things that are very easy to learn. I think the part that I really treasure is the empathy for the LPs and understanding that a lot of them have an extremely long-term view. And so when they're diligencing you as a potential fund manager, they're really looking at you as, is this someone who I trust? Is this someone who I want to be in business with for potentially decades? Who, if their first or second fund is successful, I'm going to want to invest and commit to investing in their third, fourth, and fifth funds. And so I think having that level of understanding of the mindset of an LP was really helpful, even in the phrasing of some of my conversations, the way I did outreach to potential investors. So for me personally, I think having had, experience on both sides of the table was super helpful. I absolutely want to recognize, though, that I was raising this fund with two much more experienced partners, one of whom was a partner, Eric Tsang, a partner at Kleiner Perkins for over a decade, is a serial founder himself. And so I think really also understood the process of, how to administrate a venture fund. And I think one of the biggest learnings for us actually was a legal one, because we as a fund have a rather creative financial structure in that our entire management fee and carry or profit go back to benefit Goldhouse, the foundation. So the impact component of our fund is that the financial upside for the GP, so the LPs receive their return as they normally would, but on the GP side, actually goes to benefit a foundation. And so there was a lot of kind of legal learning there in terms of how we could be strategic, because there isn't really precedent for funds that donate their profits to a nonprofit automatically. So tons of learnings. I do think it was an incredibly rewarding process, especially now a year into having fully launched and begun deploying capital. It's been really heartening to see the response of our LPs, both in terms of their excitement about the mission and their buy-in, and from many of them also relief that a fund like this exists, because a lot of them do want to put their capital to work in investing in early stage companies, but have either some hesitancy or some skepticism about the way the traditional venture system works and who it rewards. So I think a lot of the warmth of our LP reception has been getting to be a part of something that is truly doing well by doing good.
That's amazing. We have that same phrase internally, doing well by doing good. And another being that mission opens doors that, your goals alone otherwise can't. And so I think that really speaks to a lot of the work that you guys have been doing, where, when people find something that resonates, something that they wished existed, and they can finally have that opportunity to participate, they're super excited to. The other thing I was struck by as you talk through the fundraising process was the role just like trust comes in. And I think it all goes back to relationships and how you build relationships, how you instill confidence, and kind of that question of like, do I want to work with this person for a decade? Because, as investors, we ask the same thing when we're looking for founders to invest in. And so just to note that LPs are asking the same questions of us. Totally. What are some of the other traits that you think about when you're looking for founders for the accelerator or for direct investments from Gold House? Are there any 1, 2, or top 3 traits that you think about that get you really excited to want to invest?
Totally. I mean, I think when it comes to the founders themselves, like this is assuming that we feel like there is a big market opportunity and that they're kind of the right people to play in the space. I think, in addition to having the right expertise, in addition to having like the right background and the right knowledge of your industry and your product that you're building, I think mental fortitude is a huge one for me. And this is something that I try to assess in the first conversation with any founder, which is, why do you really want to do this? Like out of all the other options that you could have. And I always ask that question too, which is like, what could you be doing if you weren't doing this? And what else did you consider doing? Because for me, being a founder is an incredibly long and lonely journey. And we talk about this in a lot of our founder education programming when we talk about like, what is it like to really go from 0 to 1, but then from 1 to 100. And so the ability to have that grit and stick with a process, even through the really, really tough times, is something that I can't miss with a founder. Another thing is really important to me is teamwork and the ability to lead a team very, very well. I think we've talked about storytelling a lot during this conversation, but the ability for a founder to sell a vision not only to their investors, but also to their customers and also to the potential hires that they're going to have to tempt away from other lucrative job opportunities, is something that only the founder can really do. And so if that person is not able to paint that vision and inspire others to join them, even in the face of uncertainty, that's also, that's a green flag that we look for.
Amazing. So grit, teamwork, and being able to inspire and paint the vision to bring everyone along with you, from your investors to employees to customers, is so important. So definitely appreciate those. And those are things that we think about a lot as well. And I guess kind of shifting to like the long-term perspective a little bit, where do you see Gold House Ventures being 10 years from now? And I guess, how do you think about where the VC ecosystem should be 10 to 20 years from now as Gold House Ventures becomes this larger fund, as the nonprofit side grows as well, and some of the media work that you guys do? And paint that picture for us of where things should be and where they will be.
Yeah, so I think when we first set out to build this fund, the goal was to be the definitive Asian and Pacific Islander venture fund. And I think so far we've done that. And I think so far, though, that is because there are very few other people building in this space. And so Gold House's brand has always been as the go-to for representation in culture and commerce, for APIs. I think as we continue to build, I actually do see us going beyond purely the API founder and investor community. I think a lot of what matters most to me in venture is increasing access for all underrepresented communities. So you see that in our board efforts where we're partnering with other funds. But I think even on the investment front, to me, it's like, if you want to change who has access to capital and who has access to resources in venture, you can't segment even further than we've already kind of been segmented as minorities. It really is a stronger together type of mentality. So I see us becoming hopefully a beacon of leadership and hope and connection for other minority focused funds, and bringing us all together, not only to pool our talent as we're doing now, but also to pool our investments. I think this really is kind of a team sport mentality when what you're competing against, and not even competing against, but trying to participate in, is just the cream of the crop of all the best deals that are getting investment and that VCs are competing for. If we help each other, we create the kind of landscape that also benefits founders. So that's the vision that I have for, us, 3-4 funds down the road. And I hope that that's reflected in the broader venture community as well. I actually wrote my business school essay on this, and the prompt was, what matters most to you and why? And what mattered most to me was making sure that people who look like me, who have my background, could actually see entrepreneurship and other riskier career opportunities as options. because I think in the face of not having a safety net, in the face of feeling a lot of cultural or familial pressure to go down certain paths, what we're building is that safety net. It's that encouragement. It's that, like, you can do this because we'll be there to catch you and we'll be there to support you, kind of mindset that I hope, permeates to the rest of the venture and entrepreneurial community.
That's amazing. And I love that vision of like the beacon, of like this lighthouse that brings people together. And like, yeah, like what would venture look like if all of these diverse focus funds and everyone together really did collaborate more deeply and really could uplift all of these incredible founders? Because you're right, to your point, it's we don't, like, venture can be competitive, but we don't see it that way because there is so much work to do and so many founders to support down the road.
Absolutely.
Definitely. And I guess more personally, like, you've kind of done it all, right? Like, you founded an accelerator, you've been an angel investor, a family office investor on the LP side, now, leading Gold House. So such an inspiring journey and path. And I'm curious, like, how do you think about, what you want your story to do and how you want your story to inspire others? You just shared a little bit about like what matters most, but I'm curious if there's more there that you'd want to share as well.
Yeah, I think something that I have been reflecting upon is, especially when a lot of this kind of has happened relatively early on in my career, and I see my path as, stretching out far, far ahead of me. I think especially as women of color, we have this like pressure to be perfect all the time. And then if we're going to do all these things, if we're going to be an investor or a founder or a GP of a fund, that you have to do it and in a very pristine way. And I think something that I want to do and I want to help take the pressure off of others is to not feel that need to be perfect or give the illusion that you are perfect. It's really nerve-wracking to host an annual meeting. It's really stressful to write a good update for your LPs. It's really chaotic to focus on meeting founders and getting to know their stories and how you can help them, but also simultaneously building basically a business from scratch if you're running a fund. And so I want the like messy reality, I guess, of this entire experience to feel more acceptable to talk about and to reveal to others. And I want it to not diminish the credibility of the people who choose to be real and show up authentically and talk about like the 360 view of what this experience is like. So I want people who are in my shoes or who want to be in these shoes to feel empowered and to understand how rewarding that can be, but also to say it's okay. It's scary. It's sometimes terrifying. And we can do it together.
Totally. And when I hear that, and I feel the same, it's like there's that pressure, right? To like, we're building something that hasn't really existed yet. And it's like, I know one of the things we talk sometimes about is like, if it fails, we don't want it to be seen as like the thesis failed. Maybe it was us. And of course we want to be successful. But I think overall it's like, we don't want anyone to feel alone, and we want it to be okay for like the messy pieces to show up. And so that resonates a lot for me personally when we want to put, the best face forward in media and, for what we're building. But it's not always easy, and we are taking a lot of risks. And it's scary. And there's sometimes where like we don't know what we're doing and we're figuring it out as we go. And you're right, like people don't really talk about those pieces quite as much. Definitely. Well, fantastic. Well, I'll wrap with 2 quick questions. The first is there a book or podcast that you think anyone who is looking to launch a fund should be reading or listen to? What are those?
Oh, that is such a good question. In terms of, podcasts, definitely listen to this one. I would say in terms of a book, so I'm reading this book right now, and it's actually written by one of my professors at Stanford, and it's called Humor Seriously. And it talks about the role that humor plays in business, and kind of actually gets to some of the things I was talking about earlier, which is that, we feel the need to be very data-driven and very buttoned up and put together, and that we lead with competence, and that's how we get people to trust us and follow us. And I think what gets left behind in all of that is the power of human connection and the power of humor and the power of self-deprecation and kind of like showing this less serious side of a person and how impactful that can be as a leader in getting others to join you. So I think especially for people who are trying to build things net new rather than like within existing organizations, I'm finding this book really helpful because it's sort of a secret weapon, and it's something that people are like, may not feel at liberty to express until they're, the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. But I think along the way, even as you're building things in the very early stages, this idea of like, we can laugh a little, like we can laugh at ourselves, we can laugh with each other, and that will make what we do much more fun and enjoyable and rewarding.
I dig that. I'll have to pick that up. I've got like a list for the holiday downtime, so that should be on there too. And then my last question. I mean, you've done some incredible things in your career. I've touched on them earlier too. I guess if you weren't a VC today, I guess where would life have taken you? Like, what would you be doing right now in your work?
Oh man. If I weren't a VC, I think I would actually want to be a coach. And probably like some sort of executive coach or founder coach, or someone who's just focused on people who are really trying to progress in high octane careers, and they need a sounding board to help them kind of think through the tougher, more messy parts. In many ways, I think being a VC is like being a coach, because you're coaching your founders. You're kind of there as their mentor, their therapist, their support system. But you also have this like financial tie. And so there's this inherent, like, we must succeed and succeed together. But I think the beautiful thing about being a coach is that there's not really anything in it for the coach beyond just the heartwarming like reward of seeing someone who you care about succeed. And that's always been the part of being an investor that I find the most enjoyable. And so if I didn't have a fund to invest, I think I'd probably be doing a lot of similar behaviors just without writing a check.
Fair enough. Where it's like the heartwarming piece is getting to see people progress, advise, course correct, and just like be there. Because I think investors generally, like, we are kind of everything all at once of what our founders need us to be. But to your point, like without that financial tie, I think it feels a little bit more heartwarming perhaps too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, Megan, thank you so much for joining our podcast. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you. And congrats again on everything you've built. And we're excited to see how things continue progressing with Gold House.
Thank you so much for having me, Gabby.